There was once a morning so still that even the wind seemed to be listening. Maxi stood alone on the hill behind her cottage, her light blonde curls lifting softly in the dawn air. Beside her sat Lucy, the sturdy Rottweiler, her chest proud and alert. Gypsy paced in small thoughtful circles, her nose twitching at scents no one else could detect. And Psycho, vast and calm as an ancient mountain, sat with the patience of a creature who already knew far more than he ever bothered to explain. Below them the town was beginning to wake. Windows opened, doors clicked shut, cars coughed into life, and from the waking streets words began to rise. I'm exhausted already. Nothing ever changes. Oh, this day is going to be a nightmare. I can't deal with this. It is what it is. At first Maxi only heard them as people always hear words, passing, ordinary, and hardly noticeable. But that morning, something strange was different. As each sentence drifted upward, it did not disappear. It stayed. The words hung in the air like faint smoke. A muttered complaint became a grey ribbon that wrapped itself around a chimney. A bitter remark drifted into a flock of black commas that circled over a road. A sigh of hopelessness became a little leaden cloud, heavy and slow, trailing just above a woman's head as she walked. Maxi narrowed her eyes. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Lucy gave a low huff. Gypsy stopped pacing at once and stared hard at the sky. Psycho blinked once as if to say, "At last." More words rose from the town. "I'm such an idiot. Of course this will happen to me. I have no choice. I'm stuck." Each phrase shimmered, then thickened into shape. Some turned into chains, some into ropes, some into tiny cages with open doors that no one noticed they had stepped into. Some became stones which people seemed to carry without knowing why their backs had grown so bent. Maxi's breath caught. It was as if the whole world was being built in front of her, not from brick or timber, but from language. Then somewhere beyond the hill there came the deep rushing sigh of a great burner flame. Maxi turned. Rising out of the last veil of dawn mist was the most peculiar hot air balloon she had ever seen. Its envelope was stitched together from impossible things: faded dictionary pages, scraps of old maps, sheet music, pressed letters, bits of poetry, and golden thread that flashed in the morning light. Its basket was carved wood, polished and worn, with brass corners and tiny engraved symbols shaped like commas, feathers, and keys. Ropes twisted upward like braided sentences, and across the wide fabric of the balloon, words moved slowly as though they were alive, rearranging themselves in graceful currents. Lucy barked once. Gypsy backed up, then came forward again, torn between caution and wonder. Psycho rose to his feet with noble dignity, as if this sort of thing, while unusual, was not entirely unacceptable. The balloon descended in a smooth, deliberate drift and settled onto the hill with barely a rustle. From the basket stepped the strangest gentleman Maxi had ever met. He was tall and wonderfully narrow, dressed in a moss-green coat with tails, a burgundy waistcoat, mismatched socks, and boots polished to a reflective shine. His silver hair sprang out in energetic disobedience beneath a hat decorated with quills, paper birds, and what appeared to be a teaspoon. Round spectacles balanced near the end of his nose, and around his neck hung a pair of tiny opera glasses, a brass whistle, and a fountain pen on a ribbon. He stepped onto the grass, looked up at the sky crowded with drifting phrases, and sighed. "Oh dear," he said. "It has begun thickening again." He then noticed Maxi and broke into a delighted smile. "Excellent," he said. "You can see it." Maxi stared. "See what?" "The weather," said the man, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. He removed his hat and bowed with surprising elegance. "Professor Quill," he said, "collector of sayings, cartographer of spoken weather, reluctant corrector of linguistic catastrophes, an occasional balloon pilot. Maxi glanced at the sky, then back at him. The weather is made of words? Professor Quill lifted one finger. Not entirely, but far more of human weather than anyone dares admit. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Most people think they only speak. They do not. They cast. Maxi felt a shiver move through her. The professor turned and opened the basket gate. Well then, he said briskly, we have very little time before the town is buried in the consequences of its own language. Are you coming? Maxi looked at the balloon, then at the sky, then at the dogs. Lucy had already put her front paws in the basket. Gypsy stood rigid, ears up, listening to something distant. Psycho walked forward with solemn certainty and stepped aboard as if entering a sacred hall. Maxi smiled despite herself. I suppose that means yes. And so with one great exhale from the burner, a flame shaped uncannily like a golden letter, the balloon rose into the morning sky. At first the ascent was gentle. The hill fell away beneath them. Rooftops shrank. Roads became lines. The town looked peaceful from above, but the air around it told a different story. Words drifted everywhere. Some glowed, some dragged, some tangled, some fluttered like birds. Professor Quill adjusted a brass lever, then handed Maxi a small telescope. Look there, he said. Maxi peered through it and gasped. Below, a businessman in a neat suit was walking fast, muttering, I'm under so much pressure, under so much pressure, under so much pressure. As he spoke, great invisible beams were forming above him, heavy iron structures pressing down lower and lower until he was finally walking bent beneath them. Maxi lowered the telescope. He's making it real. Professor Quill nodded. Yes, humans are astonishingly obedient to their own declarations. The balloon moved higher and entered a pale silver layer of cloud. The air here felt heavy and sad. What is this place? Maxi asked. Professor Quill gave her a look over his spectacles. The Mourning Morning, he said. A fog bank fed by unconscious greetings. Every day people rise and say words they do not feel, do not question, and do not hear. Good morning, they say, while their hearts drag behind them. Over the years, sound remembers. Maxi listened. All around them, faint echoes whispered through the mist. Morning, morning, morning. Shapes moved within the cloud, not frightening, but sorrowful. Pale ribbons of tired habit, thin droplets made of routine, resignation, and unexamined speech. So are people never supposed to say good morning? Maxi asked. Professor Quill gave a delightful bark of laughter. Oh, no, no, no. The problem is not the word. It is unconsciousness. A word spoken asleep has a very different effect from a word spoken awake. One may bless, and the other one may bind. Maxi stood very still. She thought of all the phrases people tossed around, because everyone else did. Words said not from truth, but from repetition. Words so common, they became invisible. Thoughtlessly spoken, thoughtlessly received. The balloon rose out of the silver fog and into a bright, clear band of air. Ahead of them floated a most peculiar landscape. Huge towering platforms, chairs, thrones, podiums, and signs hovered in the sky. Under them stood crowds of grown men and women, heads bowed, holding papers stamped with the words, approved, denied, not enough, too much, behave, wait, obey. Maxi frowned. What is this place? Professor Quill removed his hat and held it respectfully against his chest. The fields of understanding. Maxi blinked. Understanding. He nodded gravely. Observe carefully. Here people live beneath the words and rules of others, convinced they must remain there. They call it understanding when often it is merely standing under an authority they have forgotten to question. Maxi watched a woman beneath a floating stone sign that read, You are difficult. She had been there so long, the roots of script had wound around her ankles. Nearby a man stood under a great hanging document stamped, Too late, though its corners were crumbling, and it no longer seemed to hold any real power at all. Can they leave? Maxi whispered. They can, said Professor Quill softly, but first they must hear the sentence that holds them. Maxi pressed her hand to the rim of the basket. Lucy gave a soft whine and leaned against her leg. Gypsy stared below, as if trying to memorize every trapped soul. Psycho simply watched, steady as a guardian. How do people get out? Maxi asked. Professor Quill looked at her for a long moment. By saying something truer. The wind shifted. The balloon drifted eastward into a darker and far more chaotic current. Here the air crackled. Half-formed remarks collided with fearful thoughts. Complaints hanged into predictions. Sharp little phrases spun like shards of glass. This, said Professor Quill, gripping the side of the basket, is a storm of idle speech. Mind your head. A cluster of words shot past them. Did you hear? Can you believe? They always. I knew this would. Watch out. Maxi ducked as a jagged phrase whipped over the basket like a torn signboard. Below them, the town was barely visible through the turmoil. She could see people talking in cafes, at office doors, in queues, over fences, and every word they spoke fed the storm. So many people don't mean half of what they say, Maxi murmured. Meaning is not the only force, said Professor Quill. Repetition is powerful. Emotion is powerful. Imagination is powerful. And the spoken word loves form. He pointed upward. There, among the dark whirling phrases, were thoughts, not spoken aloud, but visible now in faint ink-like streams. Doubts, fears, old rehearsed arguments, unlived conversations. Things people said to themselves in silence, again and again. Maxi watched them curl through the air like ghost writing. You mean thoughts too? Professor Quill's expression softened. My dear Maxi, thoughts are often the first draft of the spell. She fell silent. Below language, beneath speech, beneath habit, there was an even deeper current, what people whispered inwardly when no one else could hear. Perhaps that was where so much reality began. A gust hit the balloon hard, and the basket dropped. Lucy braced herself wide-legged. Gypsy barked sharply. Lucy planted his paws with immovable calm. The burner hissed, but the balloon did not rise properly again. Professor Quill frowned and checked the weight lines. Ah, he said, there we are. Attached to the sides of the basket were several heavy sandbags Maxi had not noticed before. Each was marked with large dark lettering. I'm not ready. I always get it wrong. Nothing changes for me. I have to struggle. Who do I think I am? There's never enough. These are ours? She asked. Professor Quill gave a little shrug. Not mine, I hope. Balloons collect them. Travellers too. The basket dipped again. We cannot rise while carrying sentences that agree with gravity, he said. Maxi moved to the nearest bag and touched the words stitched into it. They were warm, alive, not just statements, but loyalties, old agreements. Invisible oaths people made to pain because pain had once felt safer than possibility. How do we get rid of them? She asked. Professor Quill looked at her seriously now, all quirkiness put aside. You must not throw them over simply because you dislike them. They must be replaced with words that are honest enough to hold your weight, but open enough to let you move. Maxi stood very still. She picked up the first bag. I'm not ready. Her mind raced through all the times people used that sentence. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was fear in a costume. She took a breath, and then she said clearly, I am allowed to begin before I feel fully ready. The bag loosened. The dark words faded and were replaced by soft gold stitching. The rope untied itself and the bag slipped free, falling through the storm, dissolving before it reached the earth. The balloon lifted a little. Maxi reached for the next one. I always get it wrong. She frowned. No, she said slowly. I am learning through what does and doesn't work. The bag released. Another rose away. Nothing changes for me, Maxi swallowed. Change begins the moment I stop repeating what keeps me the same. The bag vanished. The balloon rose higher. Lucy barked, excited now. Gypsy's tail flicked in wild approval. Psycho, enormous and serene, looked almost pleased. One by one, Maxi faced the bags. I have to struggle. I may grow without worshipping hardship. Who do I think I am? I am still becoming, and that is enough. There's never enough. I choose to notice what is already present, while making room for more. At last, only one bag remained. It was the heaviest by far. Maxi bent over to read it. It is what it is. She stared at the words for a long time. The phrase sounded practical, even wise, and perhaps sometimes it was, but here it had become something else, a lid, a closing, a refusal to engage with the living nature of reality. Professor Quill spoke very quietly. Some phrases masquerade as peace while hiding resignation. Maxi put both hands on the bag, then she lifted her chin and said, It is what it is for now, and I am free to meet it differently. The final rope slipped loose. The bag dropped. The balloon surged upward with such sudden grace that Maxi laughed aloud. They shot clear from the storm and into a region of sky so luminous that the air itself seemed woven from song. Letters moved in bright streams all around them. Vowels arched like bridges. Consonants flashed like birds. Punctuation drifted like stars. Every breath shone faintly, as if spoken into gold dust. Professor Quill smiled. The spellbound wind. Maxi turned in wonder. This is where words become things most quickly, he said. Not because the wind is magical, though it is, but because there is no resistance here. No fog of habit, no storm of contradiction. Thought, feeling, and language must agree. Maxi closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel it. This place would not tolerate empty phrases. Here, false brightness would vanish, forced affirmations would crumble, and borrowed language would flutter apart like dry leaves. Only what was alive in the speaker could take form. Professor Quill reached into his coat and drew out a fountain pen with no ink. It is time, he said. For what? For a new word. Maxi stared at him. A real one. A living one, he said. Not for the dictionary, for the soul. He placed the pen in her hand. It was warm and humming faintly. All true language begins before speech, he said. Find the word that carries what you have seen. Maxi looked out over the glowing sky. She thought of the fog of unconscious greeting, of people bowed under inherited verdicts, of the storm built from repetition, of thoughts writing themselves in secret, of the sandbags of limiting loyalty, of how reality bent not only to facts, but to the language with which people met them. And deeper than all of it, she felt something else, a truth both simple and immense. Words were not magic because they controlled the world. Words were magic because they trained the speaker into relationship with the world. They taught the heart what to expect, the mind what to look for, the body what to prepare for, and the future what kind of invitation it has received. She opened her mouth. The word came all at once. Vera Lumia. The moment she spoke it, the air blazed. The word circled the balloon in a ribbon of living light. Vera Lumia, Professor Quill repeated softly, delighted. What does it mean? Maxi asked, startled. Professor Quill beamed. What do all true soul words mean? More than explanation can comfortably manage. Still he closed his eyes as if listening. Truth with a light in it, he said at last. Speech that illuminates rather than imprisons. Language that reveals a way forward. The glowing ribbon of Vera Lumia swept out across the sky. As it moved, the dark knots in distant clouds loosened. In the fields of understanding, a few heads lifted. In the mourning morning, the fog thinned. In the storm of idle speech, some jagged fragments fell harmlessly away. Maxi watched, not in triumph, but in awe. The world had not been forced, it had been invited. Professor Quill tucked his hat more firmly onto his head. "Remember this," he said. "The aim is not to use words to dominate life. Life is not a servant to human vanity. The aim is to speak in a way that cooperates with truth, possibility, and creation." Maxi nodded slowly. Below, the town shone in the afternoon light. Not transformed beyond recognition, not turned into fantasy, but changed in subtler ways. A woman paused before saying, "I'm such a mess," and instead put her hand on her heart. A man halfway through "This always happens to me" stopped, frowned, and looked around as though he had heard his own sentence for the first time. Someone opened a shop door and said warmly, fully awake, "Good morning," and this time the words rang clear as bells in sunlight. No mourning followed them, only brightness. The balloon began its descent. As the hill rose up to meet them, Maxi's heart felt both fuller and quieter than before. They landed with a soft bump in the same place from which they had left. The sky above was now wide and blue and apparently empty, but Maxi knew better. Professor Quill stepped down from the basket and turned to her. "You will still hear careless speech," he said. "You will still feel the drag of old thoughts. So will everyone. The point is not perfection. The point is participation." He tipped his hat. "Choose words that leave doors open. Choose thoughts that do not turn every path into a wall. And when you discover you have been casting unintentionally," he smiled, "cast again." Lucy leapt from the basket first and shook herself grandly. Gypsy followed, immediately sniffing the wind, as if checking whether any dangerous phrases remained. Psycho descended last, dignified as ever, and sat beside Maxi like a silent monument. Maxi smiled. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Professor Quill placed one polished boot onto the basket step. "My dear girl," he said, "whenever language begins taking itself for granted, someone must come along and untangle it." He gave her a wink. "Listen carefully at dawn." And with that, he climbed aboard, released the ropes, and let the burner bloom into gold once more. The balloon rose. Higher and higher it drifted, the patchwork fabric glowing against the late light, its pages and maps and poems whispering together in the wind. Soon it became a small bright shape against the sky, then a moving speck, and then nothing at all. Maxi stood on the hill long after it had vanished. The dogs waited with her. At last she looked out over the town. People still hurried, and doors still shut. Cars still passed. Life was still life, yet now she could hear the edges of it. She could feel the shape of words before they were spoken. She could sense the moment a thought tried to become a sentence, and a sentence tried to become a structure. A part of her wanted to correct everyone, but another part, the wiser part, knew that that was not the way. Words forced onto others became yet another form of standing under. No, this work would begin closer to home. Inside her own mouth, inside her own mind, inside the quiet private places where reality was first rehearsed. Lucy nudged her hand. Gypsy leaned lightly against her hip. Psycho gazed at her with those ancient eyes of snow and moonlight. Maxi laughed softly. "Well then," she said. She looked at the descending sun, the breathing earth and the living sky, and this time she chose carefully. "What a good day to begin again." The words left her like warm birds. They did not bind, they did not burden, they did not pretend, they simply opened. And above her, so high it could barely be seen, the spellbound wind answered with a single shining quill of gold. After that day, Maxi understood something most people spent years forgetting. The world was not only made of things, it was also made of names, thoughts, and meanings laid upon them. And though not every word became reality at once, every word invited reality in some direction. So she became careful. Not fearful, careful. Because some words were cages, some were clouds, some were anchors, some were wings. And life, she realized, was listening more closely than anyone knew.